Okay, so continuing with our paper, 21, which combination is usually found in less developed economies? So there is a low capital to output ratio. External debt, well, normally they have large debt, not low debt. Population growth is usually high, not low. You normally save less. If you're poor, you normally consume a lot. So, well, wait. Yeah. So D can be right because um, there is a low saving ratio because there's a high consumption ratio. You save less, you consume a lot because you're poor. So obviously, if a lot of your population is poor, just meeting their basic needs for the day takes up most of their income. So there isn't really any income left for saving. Whoops. Anyhow, so both of these are fine. Capital to output ratio, well, I think we can cross out A as well because A indicates that if that for a very low capital, so that if you took capital to output ratio, there's a very low amount of capital you need to produce a very high amount of output. So like you're being very efficient, and normally less developed economies aren't very efficient. Normally, less developed economies would have to put a lot of inputs to get a little output, not have the other way around. So you can cross out A, giving you D. And even if you look at this, it should be a high population growth. It should be a high external debt, but you've crossed out the first column. It should be a high. It should not be a high savings ratio, anyways. So even if you
I think इस ऑप्शन के लिए लेकिन वैसे should have a low capital to output ratio मतलब कि क्योंकि they're not efficient, so like for every unit of capital that you employ you get a lower output.
No, so the capital to output ratio is something like this: capital to output. So they're talking about this fraction. So let's say that's something like this. So 1:5 is low, 1:25, well, that would be high. So basically, the idea with a low ratio is that for yeah. So yeah, I would agree with Sharia.
You won't have greater technology na वैसे, so they
Yeah.
have
Okay. So this is a better way to look at this. I would agree with Sharia that a low capital to output ratio means that for the same amount of capital you're producing, you have a low output. But a high capital to output ratio would mean like, okay, you use the same 1 unit of capital, but you got a higher output. So obviously you would get a low output because, well, one can say that you're not as efficient, you don't have as much like technology as Sharia pointed out. However, you'd still cross out A because you don't have a high savings ratio. So on that basis, you could still cross out A. But a capital to output ratio that would be low. That is fine. Anyhow, 22, which change is most likely to increase both economic growth and economic development in the long run? So a decrease in the savings ratio. So if you saving less, you'd probably consume more, which means your aggregate demand would go up and stuff like economic growth might happen. But I don't see how economic development is happening here. I don't see how the standard of living, how the quality of life that economic development stresses on is being met here. So we can cross that out. An increase in investment in human capital would again increase your productivity. So it would increase your aggregate demand. So economic growth is still fine here. I'm not too sure about economic development.
because like if people have more education they have a better lifestyle or generally economy better ही होगा.
Yeah, okay. But just to clarify, any economic growth does mean economic development because one of the major factors of economic development is GDP per head. However, we have to look at the most likely scenario. But as Shayar points out, hello?
They said in the long run. So long run में you're ignoring this ना, long run के लिए तो education is very important. Productivity बढ़ेगा, बाद में जाके ज़्यादा growth होगी.
Oh yeah. So in the long run, then economic growth, you're looking less towards actual growth. You're looking more of potential growth, something that will, shift PPC. So A wouldn't shift your PPC anyways, but productivity. So productivity does, it would increase aggregate supply, it would shift PPC. And obviously, if you're investing in human capital by educating them, then economic development also happens. So it could be B. Um, if you're depleting non-renewable resources, well, then definitely economic development definitely has not happened. So you can just cross that right away. The greater use of compulsory overtime working of labor, well, your quality of life hasn't really gone up, right? If you're compulsory, if you're forcing them to work extra hours, well, then how has their quality of life gone up? So among the options, your correct option, your most likely case would be in B, as per the explanation that we provided. Okay, 23. Which type of unemployment occurs when aggregate demand is deficient? That is cyclical. Not much to that. Cyclical is basically something that varies with the cycles of with your business, with the cycles of your business cycle. So your business cycle varies with changes in aggregate demand. So when aggregate demand is low, you have cyclical unemployment. 24. The diagram shows the annual percentage change in employment and output in the UK private sector between 2000 and 2012. Which year did productivity increase the most? So productivity can be measured by output. Sorry. So I don't know how to denote output. Let's denote output by O upon employment upon the quantity of labor. So you want high output and low quantity of labor. Um, so now you have to look where did this increase the most. So let's just go through the options that we have. That will just make life simpler. So this is 2003, and 2003, this would be your 2003 period. Well, output did increase here, and output did go up, and quantity did remain more or less, the employment more or less remained the same. So we can say labor productivity did increase. That's definitely an option, but I'm not too sure by how much. You have to look at the other options as well. 2007, so that is somewhere around here, to here, if one can say this particular point. Now, I would not be very inclined with 2007, because while output did grow up, then employment went up as well. So your fraction kind of balances, because output upon employment, remember, it's output upon quantity. So not too inclined there. But if we look at 2009, maybe you can find something there. So whereas 2009, it's something like this. um, and here, well, in this particular case, what's happening is you're producing negative output. So here the percentage change in output is actually decreasing. um, so I don't think this should be the case here, because output is actually falling. So you're not increasing output. So how can you be productive? How can you be increasing productivity? Especially because in this case, your employment is falling, but your output is falling by more, which means a particular set of people are producing less, in fact. So they're not being productive. They're not increasing productivity. 2012, if you look at it here, well, again, your employment is above your output. So it's clearly not as good as 2003, because in 2003 your employment was here, your output is here. So you had fewer people producing a greater amount. Here you have a lot of people producing a lesser, producing not that much, not an amount, but not that much change in the amount. So you can cross out 12, because the change in employment is above the change in output, leaving you with 2003. According to Keynesian theory, when will an increase in the money supply, so money supply increased, leave the level of output unchanged? When the liquidity trap is operative? Well, it could happen, because liquidity trap again is something that Keynes himself pointed out. Um, and the idea here is that your interest rates would remain the same, so your investment would remain the same. So that's one thing there. However, increase in money supply might still encourage consumption, so the output could increase from that end. So let's keep this as on hold for now. When the money supply increase was not anticipated, it doesn't matter, it would still push down interest rates and lead to investments and so on. When there is a floating exchange rate, it doesn't matter because it will still push down interest rates and lead to investments. When there is an immediate adjustment to expectations about future price levels, I believe this would be your correct option. Uh, Ouch. Shayar, are you there? All right.
Now
And
I am.
yeah, so I was looking at D, and the reason why I'm inclined towards D is because, okay, if there's an immediate expectations to future price levels, uh, obviously, if increase in money supply means that in the future price levels would be high. So if people just look at the future price levels, they would not consume as much, they would not invest as much. In fact, they would just be like, okay, there's greater money supply now, but the price level is just gonna increase later on. So we're not going to do anything, and would hence leave the output unchanged.
ऐसा वैसे बट डोंट यू थिंक इस चीज में अगर इफ पीपल थिंक if price level would rise बाद में so they would consume more right now.
um well, if they think, but if you're talking about an adjustment to the expectation of future price levels, I mean, the idea is you might have more credit available now, but you realize that this credit availability would just lead to an increase in price. So like, it's not really an actual increase in credit. um you
True,
make
but
a
like if you have a lot of money right now say and you know कि बाद में price level बढ़ जाएगा बढ़ेगा इसलिए because आप spend करोगे but बढ़ेगा so you would rather be like यार अभी we can buy more and बाद में देखेंगे.
um that is one way to look at it, mm, but again, if expectations, so let's, if you look at it from the investment perspective first, if expectations uh, exist that prices will rise, and this will just lead to inflationary pressures, and pretty bad inflationary pressures. Monetary demand pull inflation doesn't really help that much. So we can say investments would not vary that much, right? We can conclude on that because expectations aren't that positive about a stable condition to invest. Um, with regards to consumption, well, you make an interesting point. One could say that there people would bring their consumption forward, and they do tend to do so in the cases of inflation. So that is a point. However,
But if you tend to like link ये liquidity trap का so money supply increasing फिर interest rates falling uh, would हाँ but that people won't हाँ सही है. People won't really do something if liquidity trap है.
but yeah, so if you look at the other option A here, when the liquidity trap is operative, um, well, here investments wouldn't have much of an issue because interest rates would remain the same; they wouldn't change. Um, but money supply again, but the question is, would an increase in money supply increase consumption if interest rates are the same?
I don't think they would increase it मतलब but they won't really decrease them either.
Okay, so maybe we can go with D on those bases because, sorry, we can go with A on those bases because we know for sure if the liquidity trap is operative, interest rates aren't going to change. So if interest rates aren't going to change, then maybe even your consumption, your investment for sure is not going to change. But maybe even
The
your
only reason why I think it might be D because इस तरह के question में I've seen the answers to be expectations.
exactly, that's one particular issue that I mean, I just have a hunch that it's D, even though A seems to make more sense. Um, well, if money supply increases but interest rates are the same, well then there's not really any reason why you should increase consumption though, because normally you would increase consumption when money supply increases because that pushes down interest rates, and if it pushes down interest rates, then you save less, you consume more, and hence output is changed. But
You can say कि हाँ अगर money supply बढ़ेगा so you might the velocity of circulation might increase because people might spend more and उससे but again liquidity trap है so people won't spend more ना.
they still might, even if interest rates haven't gone down. The fact is, if your money supply increases, you have greater credit available to you. um, while your opportunity cost of spending, of saving and all might be the same, But if money supply increases, there's just more liquidity in the market, in the economy. If there's more liquidity, well, there's just one way you go from more liquidity, and that is there's greater spending, one can say. I don't know. This is something that we'd have to come back to after we look at our answers. But I would stick with the D. Shayar, what would you say?
यार वैसे तो again A makes sense to me, but पता नहीं मुझे लगता है I think it's D because like I don't know पता नहीं I
Okay.
don't know.
So we both stick to D because the idea is if a change, if something has to change output, then a change has to happen. If expectations just adjust accordingly, that kind of negates the change, which is why I think D would should be fine. But we can come back to it after we check our answers and perhaps explain it a little more in detail. Anyhow, 26, in a four-sector economy consisting of households, friends, government, and foreign trade, the level of national income in equilibrium, where this okay. What must Y include for an equilibrium to exist? Now, understand equilibrium can come in two forms. It could be when aggregate expenditure is equals to national income. In fact, that's the form that they've given. In fact, because this is all. This could be called your
No,
aggregate
they've
expenditure.
asked for the other form.
Yeah, but they've asked for the other form where injections are equal to withdrawals. So your injections in a four-sector economy are investment, government expenditure, and exports. Your withdrawals are saving, taxation, imports. So if we quickly want to rearrange this, we can rearrange this in a bit. That would give you um, I plus G plus X minus M is equals to S plus T. And then if we add consumption on both sides, I hope this is fine because basically if you add consumption on both sides, if we didn't have consumption here, we want consumption here because that's the way we've given it. So just do a little math, add consumption, the consumption function on both sides. So now this is identical to this, and hence this should be what you're getting on your right hand side, which is S plus T plus C. So S plus T plus C. Very good. Shayar, do you think this needs any explanation further?
नहीं वैसे I think it's enough.
Yeah, so hopefully that's enough. When would an economic recession result in an increase in the government's budget deficit? So budget deficit is basically again your total revenue minus your government expenditure. So the budget deficit will increase when you increase your government expenditure or decrease total revenue, whichever one, or perhaps even both. And again, you have to link this to how an economic recession. So the government increases tariffs on imports in inelastic demand. This just increases your tax revenue and keeps the total amount it spends on unemployment benefits unchanged. This would reduce the deficit and not increase it. The government keeps the unemployment benefit rate and direct and indirect taxes unchanged. Well, if they're unchanged, then uh, how will this increase the government's budget deficit? It might though, because if you have a recession, then you have more people unemployed. So the unemployment benefits, even if the rate is the same, the benefits themselves could go up. And since there's less economic activity in a recession, direct and indirect tax rates might be the same. The percentage might be the same, but the tax revenue might go down. So it could be B, but let's look at other options anyways. Government reduces foreign aid and widens the tax base. If you're widening the tax base, if you're reducing foreign aid that you spend, then your government expenditure goes down. You're widening the tax base, your tax revenue goes up, which is not what we want. This would in fact move you towards a surplus, not a deficit. A government reduces the unemployment benefit rate and decreases the tax-free allowance on income tax. So if the unemployment benefit rate goes down, that means spending is going down. Uh, Understand here, they're not saying decreases the tax-free allowance on income tax. They're saying that basically they're not saying they reduce tax rate. Understand that They're saying the free allowance, the amount of income on which there was no tax, we're going to reduce that. Uh, we're going to reduce the amount of income on which there was no tax. So previously, if you were going to start taxing from, let's say, 10,000 rupees a month, we're now going to start taxing from 8,000 rupees a month. Basically means they're going to have more tax. They're going to basically increase your tax revenue. And obviously, that is not what you want. That moves you towards a surplus, leaving you with B. Because while things are the same here, just factor into account the effects of the economic recession. They've given that in the question for a reason. Anyhow, 28. What would be most likely to rise if unemployment is increasing in an economy? The human capital of unemployed workers know when you're unemployed, your capital is likely to go down as you undergo a process known as of known the process of de-skilling. So your capital goes down. The living standard is likely to reduce because you're unemployed, you have less income, so less living standard. The nominal money wage rate of employed workers, well, we're not too sure of that, because if unemployment is increasing, it would depend on the reason of unemployment. If unemployment is increasing because, let's say, aggregate demand is low, then even these guys would be paid less. Their wages would be less because generally the demand, one could say the demand for labor here is low. If demand for labor is low, then wage is less. So with most likely I can eliminate this because, well, the nominal money wage rate is likely to be low. I don't know. I can't really tell unless I know the cause of the unemployment. So we can't say that this is most likely to rise. What is most likely to rise is the tax burden on employed workers, because, well, you still need the same amount, a similar amount of tax revenue, more in fact, because you have to pay for unemployment, stuff for unemployment benefits. You need to spend on stuff like this, but where do you get your tax from? Before, a lot more people were paying tax. Now only there are few people left who are employed, so the tax burden on them will be much greater because there are few people paying tax. Are we fine with this, Shayar?
हाँ.
All right. 29. What is most likely to result from foreign direct investments in developing economies? So, a deterioration in the trade balances of developing economies? No, because foreign direct investments would go in, I don't know, would they go in your capital account or in your financial account? Or would that depend?
That depends, I think, क्योंकि दो तरह की होती हैं, portfolio and direct.
Exactly. So it would depend on which type of investment it was. Is it for a particular project? Blah blah blah. But what you can be sure, it's not gonna be an inflow in your trade balances. So it won't affect. It won't definitely won't deteriorate your trade balances. If anything, it might help you produce better and export better. It won't deteriorate it though. A reduction in migration to urban areas in developing economies. Not sure how investment is going to do that. Most investment, in fact, is in urban areas, so that might increase migration because urban areas are getting better. So it's definitely not most likely. A reduction in the transfer of technology to developing economies. No, that's literally what you're doing. You're transferring technology through investments. So this is likely to increase, not decrease, but increase the transfer of technology. But what we can say, a rise in the per capita levels of consumption in developing economies. Investment stimulates the economy, will stimulate consumption, and so on. Would you also agree that the answer is D?
हाँ, बाकी सब वैसे भी don't make sense.
Exactly. So on those basis. Okay. What will increase the multiplier effect of an increase in government spending on national income? So basically, when will government spending really multiply national income? What will increase the multiplier effect? So if you look here, now this is very simple. So the multiplier, so you want the multiplier to be as large as possible. So the multiplier effect is increased. Now the multiplier is 1 upon MPW. You can also write as 1 upon 1 minus MPC. Now let's look at what is your marginal propensity to withdraw. That is your marginal propensity to save plus your marginal propensity to import plus your marginal propensity to tax. You want this to be as low as possible so that the multiplier can be as large as possible. That is what we're looking at. So if you increase direct taxes, you increase MPT and you increase MPW, which is not what you want. You want to decrease MPW. Increase in interest rates. So if you increase interest rates, what happens? You normally consume less, one could say. So if you, although it's a rather, um, let's put this on hold for a bit because increasing interest rates is not very a very direct effect. So let me look at the other options before I come to B.
Makes sense. Yeah.
Okay,
B
okay,
is like that.
all right. O- or okay, if Sharyar wants, then we can look at B anyways. So let's look at it like this: increase in interest rates increases the opportunity cost of consumption. You'd rather save. In fact, let's look at it like that. Why are you looking at consumption? Let's consumption go away. Who cares about consumption? You will save more. That's simple. Okay. So interest rates increase, you will save more. So MPS goes up, hence MPW goes up. And again, that's not what you want. You want MPW to decrease, as we saw here. That's wrong. An increase in the marginal propensity to consume. Now, if you look at this particular formula, 1 upon 1 minus MPC. Now, follow me for just a sec. If I increase MPC, that means that this entire bracket goes down because it's 1 minus, which means that this entire fraction goes up because if the denominator decreases, the fraction will increase, which means the multiplier increases. So
You could have made it simpler. वैसे MPC 1 minus MPC को तो हम MPS कर देते खाली saving.
yeah, so if you're increasing the marginal propensity to consume, since in a four sector economy, all of this plus MPC is equals to 1. So if you increase this, all of this basically goes down, which is exactly what you wanted here. If this goes down, this increases. So there are two ways of explaining this. D is wrong for the same cliche reason, because if MPM increases, then MPW increases, and then this increases. So K decreases, which is not what you want. So kind of got a little messy, but hopefully it's clear. And let us quickly go and check our answers. All right, so all of our answers were fine except for this one, which kind of goes to show why you shouldn't go, why you shouldn't go on what you think or what you feel, and you should just use logic to determine your answers. Well, logically, A did make sense, and that was your answer, because when this is operative, interest rates do not change. If interest rates do not change to an increase in money supply, well, then investment won't change and consumption won't change, because the reason consumption used to increase with an increase in money supply was basically because increase in money supply used to decrease interest rates, which used to decrease the amount you save, and so you used to consume more because you have a fixed amount of disposable income. That doesn't happen anymore because interest rates do not change. So obviously, when the liquidity trap is operative, and again, when the liquidity trap is operative, then the effectiveness of your monetary variable just goes down. So uh, money supply is basically a monetary tool, and in this case, it's basically, well, it really can't do much to change your output because the liquidity trap is operative. So interest rates do not change. So A was right, as we almost had deduced. So, and again, reasons why you shouldn't go on your hunches is because just because it's expectations doesn't mean it's going to be right. Because as we had discussed, in fact, we were almost close to that. Was because if we believe that future price levels will rise, which they normally do, when you increase money supply, that is inflationary. So future price levels will rise, even if you adjust to it, as Shariar had put out before. Um, if households believe that inflation will come, well, after a bit, that it will come later on, they're likely to bring their consumption forward, they're likely to bring their expenditure forward, and so consumption would increase in the short run, and obviously that would then increase aggregate demand, and so output would increase. So clearly, in this case, while expectations about price levels might nullify investments, might discourage investors, at the same time, however, something that we forgot to mention before, at times a healthy inflation rate does encourage investors. No one wants to invest in a in an economy undergoing recession. Hyperinflation doesn't encourage investors, obviously, but depending on the inflation rate, a small, healthy, stable inflation rate actually encourages investors. So you can't really make an absolute statement about investments either. But one thing is for sure, consumption in D would increase because people bring their consumption forward, their expenditure forward, because might as well consume now rather than suffer a higher inflation rate later on. So that's why D was wrong. We all B and C we already discussed why that was wrong, and hence by that logic that we explained right now, A was right, and that's the only correction we have to make for this paper. And that can basically concludes this particular paper, and that's it from our end.